Call to order the Monday, April 9th. Can we have the roll call, please?
Yes. First Vice Chair Belaski. Oh, you got to turn your mic on.
Here.
Commissioner Wyckoff.
Here.
Commissioner Rappa.
Here.
Commissioner Hearn.
Here.
Commissioner Clyett.
Here.
Commissioner Cabela.
Present.
Chairman Noble.
Here.
Mr. Chair, for approval of the agenda, I apologize, there's some confusion on there. We had the two of them meshed together, and because I tried to fix them. What I would suggest is the intent of this meeting, this workshop, is just to discuss the Board of City Commissioner referral, and that all the other items are your regular agenda items.
Which will go at the 6 o'clock meeting.
Correct.
Okay, so we're on to,
I think
Number
you need
5.
to approve the agenda, though,
oh,
with those changes.
okay, so do we have someone would like to
Motion to approve.
second?
I second it.
Can we take a vote, or we vote on it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Commissioner Wyckoff.
Yes.
Commissioner Cabela.
Yes.
Commissioner Hearn.
Yes.
First Vice Chair Belaski.
Yes.
Commissioner Rappa.
Yes.
Commissioner Clyett.
Yes.
Chairman Noble.
Yes. Now that that's approved, we are going to start with the new business, and we are going to have a presentation.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, we are here to discuss several ordinances that have been referred to you from the Board of City Commissioners. And those are all ordinances that were, 3 ordinances that were adopted in 2014, amending special area plan, the comp plan, and the land development regulations to provide for changes associated with development in the special area plan, the town center area here, and then a development agreement for the town center development that was approved subject to those various amendments. The PD ordinance adopting the town center was not referred to, just the development agreement. So what I know that you've had all that paperwork in front of you, you've had an opportunity to look through it. It was a lot of paper and many, many words. But what I was going to do was just go through the main amendment points in each of those, and then we can open it up and we can take questions. I also have them, if we need to, put them on the screen, the entire documents, but as you can imagine, it'll be a little bit difficult to read. So you may want to turn around for this. I'm going to just go, if it lets me, it appears to be doing something without me. Hang on. There we go. All right, to begin with, it's Ordinance 2014-07. This one was amending the town center special area plan. I've put them up in the order that they are numbered, not necessarily the easiest way to follow them, but, oops, excuse me. This first ordinance, which was 07, the city was obligated to evaluate the special area plan. So the purpose of this one it was to amend the town center special area plan. The special area plan had been in place for 5 years. The agreement with the county in approving the plan was that it would be evaluated after 5 years. During the process or at the opportunity of that amendment or review in 2014, staff and Planning Commission recommended approval, and the Board of City Commissioners approved changes to the plan, they are, as follows. Okay. Based on the objectives of the plan and the progress to that date, it was determined that there were limitations upon development, excuse me, it's going places without me. It was, there are limitations on the ability to develop, and they weren't encouraging enough development for the town center. It was moving very slowly, and they recommended that they change some of the portions addressing the core uses, allow for greater density and intensity in some cases as an incentive to further development. The primary amendments are as follows. It creates a new zoning district. The zoning district designed to be used within the causeway and the commercial core districts, and you have those maps in front of you. It would require mixed-use development and allow for greater percentage and greater density of temporary lodging within the area. Another amendment was it expresses the intent in the implementation section that the Plan Development District and its associated review processes be required for all development and redevelopment within the town center area. Oh, excuse me, I got an extra spot in there I don't need. But the point there is that in order to develop in that area, you would need to bring in a PD. And as most of you know, a plan development is a very specific zoning. The purpose is it is to allow more flexibility in a development in exchange for added benefits to the local government, to the city. Usually there's more contribution in covering impacts, but there also may be more restrictions for design specifications. So you're trying to allow the developers to bring something unique that fits into a particular spot by effectively creating the zoning with them. In all cases, when you do that, the zoning can be flexible, but it cannot extend beyond what's allowed in the land use. So if your land use specifies a certain density or a number of units, the PD can be flexible within that, but it can't go beyond what the land use requires. So in some cases, you would have a special area plan or another land use category that's also special associated with it. In this case, what they're saying is the special area plan projects need to be planned developments because they need to be individually designed to suit the spot where they're going, and because they're going to have more intensity and density associated with them, the city's going to want to see more contribution, more creativity on the part of the developer. So the analysis that was provided, they are required to provide analysis of potential additional impacts of the development resulting from the amendments, and that these could be met with city's infrastructure capacity. So when they looked at what they were proposing to allow any additional density and intensity, they found that the city had, if they were to project out full use of that area with their new densities, and imagine that it would be built to the highest density allowed, the city still had the capacity on its roadways and with its facilities to serve that development. So anytime you're going to increase density, you need to check, well, if it was built out to the highest capacity, would we still have roads and sewers and things of that nature? And the particular change they were making at this point indicated that we did have the capacity. And it also recognizes at the same time that anybody coming in who is going to propose a development that's going to impact any capacity, roads or sewers or water or anything else, they're going to have to provide for those impacts themselves. They have to pay for their impact by either improving facilities or providing funding for the local governments to do so. The primary amendment number 3 associated with this ordinance is that it amends language to allow for the measurement of various mixed uses. So it's allowing for uses to be mixed on a specific parcel instead of separating things out. Over the years in zoning, we had a standard way of doing things, just requiring everything on a different parcel to be a different zoning in order to protect, mainly to protect residential uses. But we have found that mixed use is a far more sustainable development style in an urban area. And so this is allowing the mix of uses within a specific project. And in order to do that, it provides for a different way of counting the impact. Instead of saying 20% is going to be residential, and so they can have, based on that acreage, they can have this much intensity. If we let it all mixed together, it's kind of hard to measure out who's taking what portions of the land. So it sets up a different way of measuring impact. Instead of doing that proportional share of area. So instead, the amendment provides a range or a proportion of density intensity for temporary lodging units. I think those are the ones they were most concerned about, were the hotel units and the impacts of that. It's a little bit hard to measure those. They're not exactly residential units, but they're not commercial intensity either. So how you count the number of trips and their would with straight residential. And so accounting for that, what they did was specified that you can have somewhere between, for instance, you can say somewhere between 20 and 70% of your impact can be from temporary lodging. So if you only use 20%, then you can use the rest of your impact in residential or commercial. So it allows for this sliding scale within the development, as long as the outcome is that the maximum intensity or density or impact is not exceeded. So those of you who are involved with real estate or land development know that if you have a big piece of land and you're trying to develop it, you don't know ahead of time exactly who's going to take which spots. You want to be able to, at the same time, know that there's a cap on the overall impact that you can create from that project. The second, did you have any questions specific to that amendment? We can go over all of this together, or one at a time. Should I go on? Okay. The second ordinance was 2014-08. This one was amending the land development regulations that regulated density intensity averaging and requiring the use of a PD zoning. Again, my typing. Somebody really should review my work before I throw it up here. I apologize for that. Requiring us. So anytime that we make changes to the special area plan, there are going to have to be related changes. Development regulations are what you're going to use to implement that strategic plan or special area plan. So once they had to other documents that related to it to provide the flexibility they needed to use those new standards. Be like the zoning and the site plan. And it addresses density and intensities of averaging. Now, the purpose in averaging is so that you can, if you have a large piece of land, you don't want to use all of the land, but it has a density associated with the whole of the land, but you may not use all of it because of parking or some kind of environmental. You decide you to average and shift your density onto a portion of the property that's more appropriate for development and gives you a better, gives you more flexibility for use of the land and consolidating your development in certain areas and also mixing it. But does not allow you to exceed the overall capacity, intensity, or density of that parcel or the other parcels it's combined with. So what this means, the aggregation of the otherwise permitted density and intensity of a parcel or parcels of land in a non-uniform or consolidated manner on a portion of contiguous parcels. So you actually can have separate parcels and take the density from one and within the project, yes. Yes, now there are some, they added exclusion areas for the averaging. Averaging had been allowed prior to this. Average to or within preservation or recreation open space areas. So when you read that text, you will notice that they crossed that portion out, but they weren't eliminating the restriction. They were just pulling it out and adding separate additional restrictions to it. So they also now specified that you could not go to or from submerged lands, so you don't get any credit for submerged lands. And you can't take averaging air density from outside coastal high hazard areas and put them into coastal high hazard areas. Definitely not what FEMA wants to see us doing. So those two, so that section of the for averaging. It also specified a unity of land requirement. That was that the entire area had to be viewed as a single project or site plan. And that the number of units, the lodging count, the floor area, impervious surface could not exceed what the land use or zoning limit was going to allow for that within that district or that area. It also specifies a procedure for reviewing the averaging and counting it out. It requires the applicant to reimburse the cost incurred with going through the process. And it specifies the criteria for approving averaging. And if you had a chance to look at your package, you noticed that there were a whole bunch of findings the staff has to go through and meet in order to approve averaging. You have to meet a whole set of criteria in there. It's typical to what we do with site planning or for variance. You know, anytime you're waiving from the norm, you want to list a whole list of findings that specify why it's an appropriate thing to do. The next amendment area under that ordinance, is that clear? Next amendment area under that ordinance was to establish the planned development district. That as a district wasn't in the code before. It requires I described for you already what a planned development is, the very specific site and development specific zoning. And it requires the PD to be used that in any town center special area project that proposes the use of density or intensity averaging. So you can only use averaging in those areas where you're in the town center and it's a special area plan and a PD. The same for commercial core and portions of the Causeway sub-district. In your packages, you had those areas designated on the maps. Those are all part of the town center area. And that you have to use a PD in order to use any resort facility high project. And I'm going to talk more about what a resort facility high is shortly. It also establishes a review process for the PD. And it requires site plan submission with PD applications. Those are all fairly standard uses for PD and methods for use of PD. It does not specify in great detail what would be included in the site plan. That additional ordinance revisions came along afterwards that specified exactly how much of a site plan, and it actually complete site plan with a PD process, which is extremely restrictive and unusual. We're talking about how to amend that to give us the level of detail we need without restricting the development to the point that you have to go back through a legislative process every time you need to make an adjustment in drainage calculations or something like that over time. You really don't want to hamstring either the developer or the local government with that level of constant amendment and review and cost. But you do want the PD to have a plan that's specific enough to assure you're getting the development that you planned on. So we'll bring that back to you. The third of the ordinances was amending the comprehensive plan. The primary amendment, first amendment, was to include density as a measure for the mixed use. For some reason, density hadn't been included before. When people first started using mixed use, a lot of times they referred to it as an intensity of development, but in a mixed use, you usually have both intensity and density. So over the years, if they had failed to do that to begin with, people have gone back and amended them, and that effectively was all that was happening with that first amendment. They were specifying the existing use limits for temporary lodging. What it was that we had a medium density use for resort facilities, and we didn't have a high density. We had a average. This is our residential facility, or resort facilities intensity. And what they wanted to propose was that we add a higher intensity in, and in order to do that, they took the existing intensity, they defined it as being medium. And so if you see all that cross out and underline, all they were doing was taking the existing, calling it medium, and then creating a whole higher level above that that was going to be the resort facilities high. So we'll go over that in a little detail here. It also, as I said, just added the resort facility high category to allow more intense and dense development in areas that were designated with that, and required that anytime you use that higher intensity, the plan would have to require a PD. You couldn't come in with a straight zoning doing that. Again, you were going to need very specific regulations to address the impacts and design considerations. It also changes the mixed use category. We had in the plan a category called just mixed use, as I said. They changed the just straight mixed use category to a planned redevelopment mixed use category, and added temporary lodging as an allowable use in that district. Up to that point, it had had a mix of residential, office, and commercial, but it hadn't specified the temporary lodging. And in most places, initially when people started using mixed use, you could include temporary lodging or hotel, motel uses in your commercial designation. But because their impacts are different than straight commercial or straight residential, the county had come back. So to be consistent with that, the city brought the temporary lodging category into the comp plan and put it in the mixed use planned redevelopment district. This part of the amendment went on to remove local controls of the mixed use and leave in place the special area plan regulation provisions. It used to have a whole series, and you probably saw in your text all this crossed out stuff. There was a long list of local requirements that were required for the mixed use developments. And it involved also the special area plans. And what they did was they got rid of all of those local controls. They left the requirement that this category was required in the special area plan, that it could only be in the special area plan. But then it specifies that that special area plan would be regulated in keeping with provisions that were included in the plan approved by countywide planning authority and pursuant to the countywide plan rules. It eliminated all local regulation on the special area plan. Well, I'm not comfortable with that, but we need to look at that. Anything that completely relieves you of home rule, I think is uncomfortable. I'd be surprised people throughout the community were entirely comfortable with that. Now, because the county's rules may be adequate, but we need to look at that to be sure, because this allows the county to change its rules, and we're just kind of subject to them as they change them because we don't have much input. You can send me to sit as an advisor on their advisory committee, And we do make input on what the county's changing its rules, but I'm one voice out of dozens that can make a contribution before it goes to the county planning commission, and then they're going to vote how they will. And to have the local government completely dependent upon that for their special area plan definition, I think is a little uncomfortable. Yes.
Linda, how do we fix that?
Well, we do. Ralph and I have talked a lot, and the city manager and I have talked a lot about amendments that need to be made to both the land use and the comp plan. Now, the comp plan and the land development regs, but we'll be coming back with a review of all those items. It's hard to do them all at once. You've seen what I've been bringing you so far. I'm trying to plug some holes for things that are creating significant problems immediately, but we also need to go through a whole review of the comp plan. The comp plan amendment is a community planning process. It's nothing that you can bring forth individual amendments, but it's really best to take the comp plan through a community planning process and have neighborhood meetings and get input. Again, you get input before you develop a proposed amendment, which means you tell me and we all work together and we come up with something based on having gotten community input, and then we propose that forward to the city commission. And it's done that way because the planning commission here is listed as the local planning agency. All local governments need one. Some places they actually use the commission, but generally it's the planning commission or planning board who does that. So we'll be coming back to you. It's not a very threatening issue because it only addresses the special area plan. And with the current projects approved for it, it will be largely built out. There's some opportunity for redevelopment, but I think that for the most part, what's in the special area plan and the part that the county has approved is all things that the local government had proposed anyway. So it's not like it's affecting the whole city, and we've got a lot of so the final document that was sent to you is the Town Center Planned Development Agreement. Now, the Planned Development Agreement, I think that you've probably received some emails addressing the Planned Development Agreement and the language and the difficulty of going through it. This is a little bit unusual for you to be reviewing because this is a legal document, and it would be developed based on the Planned Development Ordinance, which you would have approved, but a lot of what goes into the development agreement is really contract language. It's just about who's responsible for what in the contract arrangement. So the purpose is it's really a standard agreement that establishes the rights and responsibilities of the parties in the agreement. So we can go over those quickly. We have scanned it. If you would like to sit and read it together, we can do that, but we probably need to set a month aside. That's a lot of words, as was stated. Now, in the emails you've been seeing. And there is concern, apparently on the part of some people, that it's very difficult to read. I can't argue that. It's a contract. And contracts are drawn up by attorneys and people with graduate degrees quite often for this purpose of making sure everything is complete. They use a lot of language that's standard legal language to make sure there aren't holes in the agreement. So it's definitely not intended for entertainment reading, and does have a lot of legalese in it. Yes. Yes, Jen. You need to turn your mic on there.
I'm sorry. Isn't that a good thing that it is at the end, Linda, a legal agreement?
Yeah, that it's
protects both parties.
Correct. That's its purpose. And those, phrases that are so difficult to wade through, and the order that it's put together in is very standardized. And the purpose is, as I said, to avoid there being holes or confusion in the relationship, because it's making that good neighbor relationship, good neighbors, or good contracts are good neighbors, just like good, or partners, just like good fences are good neighbors. And so making sure that everything's covered in exact language that's already been through court is what they're trying to accomplish there. Now, there are some critical points in it, and this is not by any means a full list of everything that's in there. You had an opportunity to look at it. You know, it's just pages after page of responsibilities, mostly on the part of the developer, to ensure that they meet all of the requirements for levels of service, for facility improvement, that, you know, they meet all of the planning and just the good design and use of the property criteria that you need to have in place to assure that they live in accordance with the planned development zoning that was put in place for them, and that it references, talk about, and some legal action regarding the site plan, stating that it was not a final or complete site plan. It does have an awful lot of detail in it, and truthfully, some of the detail I would rather it wasn't in there, because it doesn't provide us the kind of flexibility we'd like to have in review. There's not much wiggle room at all in the thing. So you'll see at time, I do have some pictures of it here. I can give you some examples, but at any rate, it's valid for up to 15 years. From its effective date. The effective date was 31 days after it was approved. However, that time was put off by any legal action that was taken. It's tied to a specific concept plan, as I said, for the site, and that a concept plan is attached as an exhibit and becomes part of the agreement. It includes So everything that comes in has to go through a site plan review, either as a whole or individual full site plan review, and meet all criteria that were in place at the time that this was adopted. So if we change land development code, we change the comp plan, it has no bearing on this agreement. This agreement will use the criteria and the procedures that were in place at the time it was adopted, according to the agreement. It includes requirements of the, I already said that. It details the specific off-site improvements that will need to be completed prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. And all roadway improvements, you're going to have all utilities and facilities in place before a CO is offered for the land. It specifies that permitting and design cost for the required off-site improvements will be paid by the developer. It specifies the city will dedicate the transportation impact fees that it collects from the project back to the project, which is standard because you're supposed to use any impact fees that you collect for a project to deal with the impacts of that particular project, but that any cost that's not covered by the city's contribution will be paid by the developer. And then it establishes all the usual things. Effective date of the rezoning, that it would allow the applicant, if in the case of litigation, to put that effective date off, and that it provides assurances that the contract would not run out or be removed or altered during that time. And then, pictures. This is the site plan that was approved with it, and there's going to be some glare there. This is looking at the site plan. This is golf. This is the tall hotel building. Keep in mind that this was the subject of legal action. There are restrictions on the heights of the building now. Most of the buildings like these over here on the side would be only 5-story buildings. This tall one could be an 8-story building. This is Madeira Way. And includes a walkover from the beach across Gulf. to give you an idea, this is the walkover, and the beach would be over here on this side. As you can see over here, this is the post office building that is slated to stay exactly where it is. At the moment, we have no development proposal for that building. This was hotel, and this is the hotel over on this side, the tall one. This one here is a 5-story hotel now. Oops, going the wrong way there. Okay, this is along 150th, and that's Madeira Way. The Madeira Way again. You can see that there's going to be parking, wider sidewalks, planting, pedestrian lighting along Madeira Way. There'd be parking on both sides. This would be parallel parking, and this is angled parking in the back here. This is the corner where we have 150th and Golf meeting. There's an open park-like area, and the hotel steps back from the road. This is just some ground level view of that corner. This, of course, is the 150th, Madeira Way, and the yacht club and the city center over here. I can't guarantee the water's going to be that blue. That's the front corner of the large building. You see it, how it steps back. This give you an idea how these pieces all come together. This is what's called Hotel B on that corner lot. This is Hotel A. It's likely to be the first thing built. There is the condo building down 150th and another down here, and then a small marina building. All of these have requirements for separation, exact separation, setbacks from in all directions and separation between buildings. DOT's very happy with the proposal because right now there are about 9 different curb cuts along here, and it'll be dropping to 2. So they're very happy about that. Also, they're currently proposing building a pedestrian island out here to allow people to cross over safely with a pedestrian light to get to Madeira Way. Oops, I'm going the wrong way again. The buildings will have parking on the ground floors, and usually a couple floors of parking, and then the hotel or condo above it. There's also ground parking. This just gives you a wider view. And then there's a whole lot of words, as usual. This is talking about what the intent of the special plan objectives, what the objectives are. These are coming out of the special plan and how the development is meeting those objectives for the special area plan by creating a mix, tying everything together with various design elements and creating gateways and all of the various things that the special area plan requires. And then it goes into a whole lot of detailed analysis of exactly how many units and what parcel will be allowed. Now, some of this has got to change because there was legal action. The buildings were made smaller. Nothing will go bigger than is proposed here, but it's all likely, most of it's likely to be smaller and lower impact. Or detail for the special area plan. This shows overall site plan and distribution of use. Now, these are some of the things I wanted to show you. There are specific design elements in the plan that address setbacks. Usually, a setback is counted from the structural wall of the building, which would be here. In this plan, as you can see, the specified setbacks are from the balcony edge. So we're counting things a little different than usual. The building will be set back some extra feet because the balconies are all shown as being inside the building envelope entirely. There's some elevations on how the buildings would look. The specifics of the design of individual buildings is not specified in the plan. Of course, they aren't doing a building design document here. It's a site plan, but we do have to look at them for their entrances and, as I said, setbacks and how they fit within the envelope. And this shows you a little bit on how they deal with setbacks. This is the Marina building. It's a much smaller building. And as I said, the design of the buildings was not set. This is just to give you an idea. But the setbacks are definitely set. The separations are set. The heights are set. And access points. That's largely under the control of FDOT. But they've been very good about taking recommendations and working with both the city and the developer. This is another building setback. You can see how they've lined it out to show what the building area could be. This doesn't mean the building's going to be shaped this way, but it would be within this setback. So it goes through all the buildings that way. And then it gets into the really meaty stuff that only planners and engineers like to read. It's talking about the drainage and access points, the details on how drainage and the site would be prepared. This is a preliminary site plan. Some details from that. And then more site data. It's going to talk about how many rooms and what the impacts are for every single building, what its pervious surface is, and what the ratio is generally. As you can see, the overall site impervious surface ratio allowed is 0.73. There are exhaustive analysis provided for traffic impacts, maneuver impacts. So it's a complete traffic impact study that had to be submitted to FDOT, including how each intersection works and how many trips go through at various times. It's a lot of detail. And this talks about the high-rise residential condominium townhouses, what need has been and the rate at which it's been developed. And same for hotel. But as I said, all of these numbers are most of these numbers would like to be lower. That's the site plan that was submitted with it. So that's my very general review of the many ordinances before you and documents. Were there any questions? Yes.
There's also the declaration of restrictive covenants that were put on, and I have those up on the screen. I thought they were going to be printed out, but they're not, but I can read them out loud.
You can. I want the plan board to understand that typically the city doesn't enforce restrictive covenants between parties because it's an agreement among the property owners. And so that's not likely to come back to you at any time. But what happened was when they went to agreement, the parties that challenged and the developer came to an agreement to lower the impact of the development by making the buildings smaller. And also, in order to facilitate that, they adopted development, what did you just call them? Restrictive covenants, there we go, restrictive covenants to specify what those limits were going to be. So if you wanted to put that up there, you're welcome to do that.
Yep, the owner voluntarily agreed to these and recorded these in the land records, and they'll be good for a period of 30 years. It says development restrictions. Owner is entitled to use and develop the property in accordance with ordinance 2017-1 and the development agreement, as may be amended from time to time, except
I don't
the
think that's
following
gonna show up.
restrictions. With regard to Hotel A, the owner may build a maximum of 5 floors, including structured parking, with a maximum of 125 rooms. With regard to Hotel B, owner may build a maximum of 8 floors, including structured parking, with a maximum of 168 rooms and 10 condominium units. With regard to condominium A, that's condo building A, owner may build a maximum of 5 floors, including structured parking, with a maximum of 36 units. With regard to condo building B, owner may build a maximum of 5 floors, including structured parking, with a maximum of 38 units. With regard to condominium A, any condo documents regulating the operation and subdivision of the residential dwelling units shall include a limitation on short-term rentals wherein the minimum rental period shall be 29 days. And with regard to condo building B, the minimum rental period shall be 14 days. And with regard to the 10 condominium units that are in Hotel B, the minimum rental period shall be 29 days. So those are some additional conditions that the owner placed on their own project and recorded in the land records that they would be bound to for 30 years. That's it.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Linda, just a question with regards to the development agreement and the Growth Management Act. And I think it's germane to this conversation is, and correct me if I'm wrong, with the development agreement in place, you actually, as an agency, have more protections and you get more things out of the relationship than if the developer was to proceed forward with the development based on the rights that they have on that particular property.
Right. Yes, we did discuss that, I think, before you came in, what the purpose of the PD is, and you get a development agreement with the PD, the plan development, and the purpose really is twofold: to give the developer the opportunity to do something unique that serves the needs of the community in some way. And because of that, you have very specific controls, and there is a lot more control that goes into usually a PD than with standard zoning.
And can you also, for those that are not familiar with some components of the Growth Management Act and how the legislature has preempted local governments as it relates to development and what we can and can't do, if you can kind of hit on some of the things that we normally hear on our side with requesting that the city do more on a regulatory aspect or ask for the developer to pay more costs associated with their development. If you can kind of hit on what the Growth Management Act calls for and how restrictive we are as far as the relationship between the city and a developer.
Okay, well, we are required to ensure that when somebody develops, whatever their impact is with this new development, that they will pay for or provide for that impact. Different places you can coordinate it differently. Some places, for instance, allow their recreation impact to be built on site so that they don't build, if it's a built out area and they can't put any more parks around, they allow the recreational facilities to be built on site. But most facilities and utilities require that either the local government already has capacity or they would take contribution to expand their facility capacity. There are some things that the developer always ends up building, which would be improvements to the traffic access at minimum, usually some contribution to impact of roads, because of Florida, most of our roads really are at or over capacity in the urban areas. And then things like, running their utility lines, water and sewer lines. They have to put all of that in. But when they connect, there has to be adequate capacity at the plant to serve them. And if there's not, then they've got to work ahead of time to make sure that the plant is improved to handle their capacity. So because of that, generally speaking, if a local government doesn't have capacity in place, they don't approve the new development. That can be a real problem in places around the state. They have done that. They've approved things for which they really could not provide, and it ended up causing problems with existing property owners not having adequate water or sewer capacity, things of that nature. So it's really important that they make sure that they do that. If we mess up somewhere along the line and we approve something that there's not capacity for, then obviously the city is open to lawsuit. We have an obligation to provide in keeping with our comprehensive plan. That's the whole purpose in the plan, was to make sure that we coordinate our land use and our growth with the provision of services that are needed both for existing and future populations. In a PD, lots of times local governments prefer to use a PD for bigger developments because they can get more out of the developer, and usually that they're looking for is more design control, more compatibility type issues, or requiring them to, they can contribute more than their impact in some areas, just because they're willing to go an extra length in order to get the development that they want. I don't know if that answered the question adequately. Sometimes when we approve things just with standard zoning, the neighbors aren't completely happy because they don't get the kind of control that they were hoping for. With the PD, you do get a whole lot more control because there's not typically this kind of contract. You don't have a contract specifying exactly the detail of what everybody's doing on a regular development. You do have a development order, and it specifies what the site plan has to look like, but you don't have all these extra performance measures in your contract.
And that's one of the things that we certainly wanted to hit on, is that this particular type of arrangement allows for the community to be more intimately involved in the design elements, whereby if the developer was to go based on what the zoning allows for, they could have come in with a building that doesn't meet the characteristics and the nature of the community. So this is certainly something that, as an agency, we should certainly promote and look for when there is these types of development situations, because we, in essence, have a seat at the table. Also, on the other point, is the state legislature has really impacted cities greatly with some of the preemptive legislation that they've put in place with the Growth Management Act. In the past, local jurisdictions would be able to levy more fees to assist in what a development impact would be. But what happened is always it's one or two agencies that abuse that type of situation. So what the state legislature has done has come in and said, okay, when the developer comes in, the only fees that can be levied are applicable to that development and impact the development as it stands. What was happening is, if this development was in Zone 1, cities were taking money from that Zone 1 development and improving areas in Zone 2 or Zone 3 or Zone 4. And so the state legislature said, no, you're not going to have the developer pay for expenses that you as a city need to plan for. So it's very important that we as an agency, when we do get these impact fees and we work with the developer in these types of situations, that we utilize that money to offset what the actual impact to the developer is. So there were some protections put in place for the developer, and there was also some restrictions that were put in place from the city with the Growth Management Act. So as standard practice, as we move forward with additional developments in this community, these are going to be, I think, customary as the way in which we approach things, because both parties can mutually benefit from such an arrangement. If we as a city don't enter into these kind of conversations and discussions with the developer, we in essence leave a lot of opportunities on the table. So I think it's germane to the discussion that we say that this is something that is good for the city to have an agreement like this in place. And it is very unique, the small intricacies and the nuances that are associated with this, because it's not something that I've commonly seen deployed throughout the state. So for those that were involved in the process, they really had a hand on exactly what the development's going to look like, and it's going to fit into the aesthetics of the community. And you don't ever want to see a development that doesn't blend with the nature of the community, especially here in a beach community here on the west coast of Florida.
Yes, and I think pertinent to your comment about the input on the development, typically, especially in our plan the way it's written, as you know, we don't even have a public hearing for site plan review. So if somebody came in with a big development that wasn't a PD, nobody would see it except the staff. It would just go up. And that's actually why you have some things that seem to offend and surprise people now, because nobody ever did any public review or had any public comment on them, an opportunity for that. With this, there's a lot of, they have to go through community meetings, neighborhood meetings before even bringing anything in. And so when you go through a PD process, there's a lot more opportunity for the public to become involved. Even if we were to amend the plan and allow for some public hearing, there would generally just be maybe a neighborhood meeting and one public hearing at the plan board, because it would be quasi-judicial for zoning. And so you still wouldn't get as much as you get with the PD. PD is legislative. What you're doing is changing the zoning. So it's not quasi-judicial until it's gone through and been amended. So you get a whole lot more input. You can make a lot more detailed specific requirements because it's legislative. You're not tied by all of those restrictions you run into with quasi-judicial hearings.
And most developers prefer that type of arrangement with local jurisdictions because of some design elements and some things that they would, in essence, ask for the city to make concessions on if they, in fact, do X, Y, and Z. So most developers look for that type of arrangement and want to get into a development agreement as opposed to just coming in there and constructing whatever they were looking to construct.
It's a good opportunity for people to be well organized ahead of time because having worked private sector and worked with the developers, they are usually more than happy to sit down ahead of time with the neighborhood and ask them what you want to see, because they'd much rather get to the hearing process with the backing and support of the neighbors than with conflict. And they know that they're trying to fit in, and that especially in a legislative process, they can be denied for any or no reason, and so they want to work. They usually want to work. They understand that situation with the PD. You just can get a lot more individual input on design and cooperation. Yes.
I have a couple of questions. You said that the city pays toward the development, the impact money that they get. What exactly do they pay?
Well, in the development agreement that you had in front, I don't know if I got it up here. I don't see it, Gwen. Do you see the development agreement? I know you have it in your packet. There's a list.
Packet for today, the development agreement apparently doesn't have the even number pages, but it begins on 236. I think you handed out the earlier meeting last time a set of development agreements that was complete. I don't know which one they brought today.
On today's?
9.11 additional offsite improvements, and it lists all the
Do you have your packet?
developer improvements.
No, I mean, what does the city pay?
Okay, the city's not paying. What impact fees? They pay those to the city. The city will pay them back to help with the improvements for the roads. The city will use that money on the roads that are the impact is being created on for the development. And if the cost of making improvements to the road goes beyond what the developer is paying in impact fees, they also have to pick up that. So the city is not paying out of existing funding. They're only paying out of the funding that the developer.
What
How much
types
is it?
of payment the
Roads. There's a list of development improvements that have to be made in your packet, but most of it is roadways.
Okay, and my second question is, who's building the pedestrian walkway?
Well, the developer be required to build
Not like
all
the
of,
one that-
all of the improvements, yes. Well, I don't know which contractor they'll find for that, or even, that has to be finally approved by FDOT too, because it crosses their roadway. And I don't know who the actual contractor would be. I'm sure that the developer is concerned about falling bridges. They're going to be really sensitive to that.
Thank you.
When we say that the developer gives the city impact fees, you're saying that the city can only use that to fix the roads and make them adequate?
You can only use impact fees on the impacts for the area that you're taking them out of.
Is
yes.
that typical, that the
Yes.
developer gives the city money and then the city fixes it, or?
Yeah, it's basically how it's required to go, because they have to pay the impact fee, but sometimes what happens is they get credit for the impact fee. For instance, they go ahead and make the roadway improvement, and then it gets credited to them for their impact fee.
And if I also can add on to that particular point, the reason why that relationship works the best is because if they were to pay the city and then we were to go ahead and deploy construction crews to address that, we would undoubtedly take longer to get the resources necessary to be able to develop that roadway. So since they have a contractor mobilized and already there on site, they can make it consistent with their development themes, as well as getting the project done and completed on time, on schedule, and under budget, because they have a vested interest in making sure the infrastructure is in place for them to get their certificate of occupancies. So that's why that arrangement works best, whereby the city remits the money back to the developer for that, and then they're required, of course, as part, you'll see a lot of the cost associated with the arrangement being available for public consumption once the project is completed. But it's very customary to go ahead and do that. You won't have an agency that would take the money and then go ahead and go through the bidding and procurement process, because it would slow down the project at least 6 to 8 months at minimum.
The off-site improvements to the roadways that the developer will undertake are described in section 9.8 and also Exhibit C. And then there's additional off-site improvements they'll seek in 9.11. And then the impact fees are listed in 13.0. And the rough estimate is $910,855. The packet, again, today that went out did not have the even number pages. Some of this is on the even number pages. We can run some copies before you leave to make sure you all have it.
I know you had it
Total.
before. We sent one.
If you have the, if
Were you
you
able-
brought the book
did any
again,
of you
it's
go
in the
through the
book.
packet?
Complete.
You had the complete.
I think so.
Right.
And one of the other things, Linda, correct me if I'm wrong, with the recreational spaces and even the landscaping, that is the responsibility of the developer to upkeep and maintain, not
Yeah.
something that will be a burden on the city.
That's correct. They have to maintain everything within the development. We're not taking over any roadways. The roadway improvements themselves are going on to public roads, but they'll have to maintain all of the improvements along the roadways.
We found the even number pages in the book that was handed out in the previous meeting. If you look at tab 4, that's for the development agreement in total. It has all the odd and even number pages and exhibits.
What if, when the project is done and the impact of the roads weren't as a study was provided, and there's this 30-year, can that be, how would the procedure, if for some reason you wanted to change Madeira Way traffic flow, or how would that come about?
Well, once the project is completed, if the city wanted to come back through and change Madeira Way, that's on the city. In terms of the traffic impact, I can tell you the traffic impact is almost always less than you expect, because we evaluate traffic impact on maximum potential build out, and we never get to maximum build out. In addition, in this case, they're working with state roadways, and so it's kind of an over-designed thing. It's a big roadway. On Madeira Way, as I said, if they changed the design over time to Madeira Way, then it would be the city wanting to change the design. And if it impacts the development area, then we would have to negotiate that with the property owners, just like you do with anybody else.
I guess what I'm asking is,
Madeira Way is in 9.8, and it says that the city shall be responsible for permitting the roadway improvements located upon, within, or across 150th Avenue and located upon or within or across Madeira Way. The city shall also be responsible for obtaining the permit from FDOT for the elevated pedestrian crosswalk located above and across Gulf Boulevard. Upon completion, the developer shall convey the elevated pedestrian crosswalk to the city.
And what that means by our getting the permit is they go through the permit process. We don't
And
issue it until they get the permit from FDOT. That becomes.
In 9.11, they talk about signalization, the developer and the city coordinating efforts to lobby FDOT regarding traffic signalization. For example, that at Madeira Cove, 150th, and to prohibit right-hand turns from Gulf Boulevard to 150th. Those are in section 9.11.
so in essence, could the city decide that it was more beneficial to make that Madeira Way a complete PED and close the track, or would that be the DOT?
DOT does not control Madeira Way. They only have input and approval on the connections to Madeira Way. If they turned it into a pedestrian area entirely, that would require an amendment to, well, it would require an amendment to the development plan, and it would be at the city's cost. And I can tell you from a planning perspective, that's not a very good idea, because usually if you close something out entirely to traffic, it dies. It's best to have slow two-way traffic and just to allow for wide sidewalks and pedestrian access crossings. Those are the areas that stay most vibrant, they're most sustainable. There have been places all over the country. Sometimes it works, but usually, unless you have a guaranteed walking population, like in a South American city or someplace where people don't all own cars, if you don't have a guaranteed walking population, you can kill all your business off by eliminating the traffic. Yes.
Linda, there's been numerous studies that pedestrian walking slows traffic down on roads when there's crosswalks and wide sidewalks and things like that.
Right. The sidewalks,
Madeira Way, I think in the agreement still stays the property of the city, right?
yes.
Yes, the city can decide to do how they want to do traffic flow, or
Exactly.
whether they allow traffic flow at all on Madeira Way.
Exactly, but if they took all the parking, if they took all of the traffic off, they would be rendering the parking area useless, and there would probably need to be additional require coordination with the developer, because it would impact a lot of private property. Some of the parking on the north side of Madeira Way, in front of the post office, all of that parking is actually on private property. The property line goes to the back of those parking stalls, so it's not as straightforward as it looks. But yeah, they always will have control over how they use Madeira Way, but where it interacts, it's best to coordinate carefully. And your question again about, I was answering another question. Oh, about slowing traffic. Yeah, places, it's almost what you said, and then it goes beyond that. The pedestrian activity can slow traffic. Putting things in that slow traffic also improves pedestrian quality. So having on-street parking is really important, having wide sidewalks and some gap between the walking area and the moving traffic. So having a little bit of slow traffic, but or at least moderate traffic, but having cars parked along the road provides a barrier that creates a space out of the sidewalk, makes it more comfortable, and it feels safer. A lot of places in Florida, I'm sure you know, have sidewalk that dives directly into the road, and sometimes it's even with the road, and it's scary. It does not feel safe because, you know, people make slight little adjustments, and before you know it, they're on the sidewalk right with you. So a lot of this detailed, pedestrian-oriented landscaping we're doing nowadays with the benches and the pedestrian lights and the trees, all of that is being done to create kind of a wall that defines the sidewalk as a safe pedestrian area. It creates a space out of it, a place. That's the intent there.
So under this agreement, the city will still be able to close down Madeira Way if they choose to for a street fest and
They will.
things.
I recently decided they don't really like doing that. Usually when we have these street festivals, we get big pieces of equipment and stages in, and they tear up the sidewalk. And in a place like this, remember, there are going to be tall buildings on either side of it, and that creates a monstrous sound problem because the sound bounces back and forth between the buildings and acts to amplify. So we've been having some trouble with the use of Madeira Way, and the commission had just recently decided we aren't closing it for right now. They aren't going to do that anymore. But we have other places. We've got a load of parkland, and we've got a stage down at the community center. We've got green space open all around. This whole the street along Rock Park here is a good opportunity for festivals. That was what those things were designed for. So we have options.
Linda, I've got a question for you. Going back to Amendment 1, you made a comment that you feel it appeared that we're overly restrictive on some of those items. Is it your opinion that our restrictions are hampering potential developments coming into the city?
Figure out how to work the microphone. It goes away. You turn it back on and it thinks about it for a minute. What I was explaining was that when they analyzed the plan back in 2015 or 14, they found at that time that it was too restrictive, and that's why they proposed these amendments. I'm not proposing that now. No, they made the changes, and we really will want to go over those again to make sure that they're functioning properly. I mean, we're pushing 4 years already. You're supposed to review it every 5. Now we have a development that's coming up, so we'll have a better sense of how it's really performing. But I don't think we're going to find that it's too restrictive anymore because a lot of it will be planned for building already.
And you said when we were discussing Amendment 3 that we've basically given up control to the county level.
Yeah.
How do we get that back?
We amend our plan again. The community, Pinellas County community, has agreements among all of the jurisdictions to plan in accordance with or consistent with the countywide plan. And I'm going to look into the exact nature of that agreement and come back to the Planning Commission to explain it, the relationship to you, and exactly how much flexibility we really have. I think that you are always better served having at least some of your own regulations in place. Like I said, your comp plan, for instance, was originally adopted with all countywide standards so that you could, you kind of mesh development from one place to another. But then the county changed theirs, and you didn't change yours. So now you've got designations that are old and didn't necessarily serve your purpose to begin with, and they don't match the county anyway. So, we don't want to have to necessarily change all ours every time they change theirs, but we do need to keep up with things and also look at them to make sure they actually suit you here. I'm not going to tell you the original land use designations were wrong because I worked on that plan. But at the time we were using intergovernmental coordination efforts to make sure we were consistent with, we weren't necessarily exactly mirroring what the county was dictating. So I think you should take the flexibility where you can. Make sure that your land use designations are appropriate and your zoning actually is designed to suit your needs in this spot. That's the whole purpose in having it.
Well, we're so unique, I can't imagine that just some county overlay works.
Hard to imagine. Works
Yeah.
for everybody, every place. Yeah.
And do you get the feeling that we generally need to be more or less restrictive than the county's codes? Or are we allowed to be any less restrictive on any level?
Well, we're allowed to. Like I said, let me come back and see what kind of agreement. And the purpose was that local governments have their own plans. You don't want to be too much more restrictive, but I think that what you need is something specific. And in some cases, that may make you more restrictive than other places because you got small little lots and you've got uses sitting right next to each other. Usually a countywide plan involves more separation by zoning. You know, they protect things by keeping them separate entirely from each other. You don't have the luxury of doing that in a place that's this wide. Everything is pretty much next to other uses.
Buffer zones are one lot.
Right. So you need your development plans and your zoning codes, all of your restrictions need to relate to how one use performs next to another. They call that performance codes. And you know, we can even get to the point where they're design based and you can see pictures of how you want it to behave, how you want it to perform. That's what I'd like to come back to you with, the more specific performance zoning codes and design codes for you.
Well, and I do think just the nature of our community where we're located, we are going to be more restrictive than rural areas of the county or places that are not as densely populated. Plus, of course, protecting our natural resources and the nature of the community, you're going to want to protect and preserve that. But to the point, the importance of the comp plan, there's two documents that the state requires that you do, comp plan and a budget. So it is very important that we take a look at our comp plan on a regular basis. In addition to, it's a major engine for the agency as it develops when your land uses, because that is where your property values are derived. So changes to your land use and changes to your designations has a profound impact on the property values of your investment in this community. So it's very important that we consistently look at that and we don't have things that are archaic or inconsistent with the nature of our beach community here. So we definitely have to keep our finger on the pulse on that.
Yeah. We do need to be a lot more sensitive about some other things. As you know, we're entirely within the floodplain. And, you know, the bigger, as much coastline as we have here, the bigger portion of the homes are not actually on the water like you are here. So it affects the level of review that you're expected to undergo from, you know, federal authorities. But also you've got a whole lot more environmentally sensitive areas to deal with. And so we need to be really careful about how each site performs and how it, you know, impacts your environment.
Linda, I don't see anything in here regarding the height of buildings. Could you address the height of buildings? I think that's what a lot of citizens, and intensity, density. What our city is going to look like in the future. I think, you know.
Okay. In these particular development agreements, originally the buildings were capped by floors, not specific height, but by the number of floors they could have, and that's been reduced to 5 and 8 stories. But the rest of the city, we've got some cleanup to do in the code, but generally speaking, the houses are 40 feet at the peak of the roof, 30 at the eaves, and usually we only allow 3-story buildings elsewhere unless you have a PD. So it's not a very dense or intense development plan for us right now. And if somebody comes in with anything higher than that, they do have to have a PD, which, as you can see, is a pretty exhaustive process for review.
Okay, so that was my question. I understand, you know, the developments now, but for the future, that's what I'm talking about. So it's 3 stories for the future is what you're telling me.
For the moment, yes. Mm-hmm. I would like to explore with you the option of of allowing slightly higher in some places while not requiring a PD every single time, because we've got, you know, small pieces of property that could develop you don't want to have to go through a large PD process for. But in that case, you also want to have very specific codes on, if you do go this high, these are the kind of setbacks you have to have and the protections for the area surrounding. And I think you want to also look at your commercial areas to make sure that the way you're designing the sites are creating nice spaces, outside spaces, instead of just saying, well, you know, some places will allow you to go 12 stories if you set way back, but then you're just creating all this open space along the sidewalk that's not usable or friendly. So I think that from what I get, and I think what I'd like you to consider is, what is the atmosphere we're creating with our development? Not just what does individual building, how high can it go, but what are we creating on the ground? It's really, if you're standing next to a building that's 3 stories high, and you've got a really nice front on the street, and there's a shop to go into, if you put another 2 stories on there, from the sidewalk, you wouldn't know. What you'll know is whether it's comfortable on the street. What's the relationship between the road and the building and the sidewalk and the people? How much area do you have? How is the space used? That, you know, you want to think about what environment are we creating for ourselves. So.
And I think one of the things that's important for us as we look to plan for the future is the connectability of our community, but promoting multimodal forms of transportation to really have people feel comfortable that they can walk from one side of our community to the other side of the community, and we have those safe passageways. So if we're going to focus on development patterns and trends, certainly how we connect our community, because as we, you know, see redevelopment occur, we want to make sure that we create those safe places where people can walk as opposed to jumping in their vehicle and driving up and down Gulf. So those are things that is going to be a priority for us as we move forward.
Is there a method by which we can encourage mixed-use development, especially in the, you know, the Gulf Boulevard corridor, or, you know, because it seems like we've got kind of dead zones in the middle of Gulf Boulevard, which would be really nice to get rid of some of those things where, you know, you have to get in your car to go from one to the next. There's no connectability to some of those areas, and you've got a whole bunch of stuff, you know.
Yeah, you can actually require it.
Okay.
Yeah, there are ways. We need codes that specify, for instance, you can have so much commercial if you also include a certain amount of residential above, and that way you can tie to how high you're allowed to go on your building, you know, to make people provide something, contribute something to the community in order to get something back for the use of the land, that sort of thing. So you can do a lot of that.
Nice. Okay.
Thank you, Linda. That was very informative. Anybody have any other questions? Do we take questions from,
You can, it's a workshop, you don't have to, you can vote on it.
anybody have any, would like to come up and speak from the residents?
Steve Kochick, 15301 2nd Street East, Madeira Beach. If you remember this, back in 2000, we did a master plan. This was one of the visions for the city. We're up to now 18 years into this, so it's not something that was done yesterday or 2000. It's progressing. And God, you learn so much over the years with all these things. I came in and I knew zero. But over the years, and all slowly by slowly, with Gail Easley, Jill Silverboard, WD, we came to understand and learn that this is our community, and we have an opportunity that is so rare that you get to build something, and it doesn't cost you a dime. But yet, you can have the input of creating something that could be around for 100 years. Think of the people who built Europe back in the year, the cathedrals and all. They didn't have this. We have now, our cathedrals are hotels. And when you go someplace and you see beautiful hotels and all, you go, wow, that's really a beautiful hotel. That's what we have the ability to do. Does it take height? You got height right now. The condos right on 150 at their 8 stories already. That's an 8-story building that's there. That was all that the hotel wanted to put up, was an 8-story building, or maybe a little higher. You got the 2 blue ones as you come into Madeira Beach. How tall are they? Height doesn't hurt. It's beauty that enhances it, and how it's done. The main thing that we did and that we wanted to do through all these years was exactly what you're talking about, was to make Madeira Beach where you park your car and you walk from one end to Madeira Beach and back, because everywhere you walk is so interesting that you go, oh, look, what's that down there? And you walk down there, and before you know it, you're at John's Pass. Do you ever walk in New York City or a big city? You can walk for 10, 15, 20 blocks and not think twice, because you're always looking in the store window, a restaurant, another sight to see. That's what we have the ability here to do now. And the only thing that's going to keep that from happening is small minds, restrictive minds. This is a time that we have an opportunity to go for it, to expand, to say what really is possible. They got the money. All we need is the ideas. It doesn't cost us a dime. And can it be beautiful? Can it be something that you're proud of, that you bring people and say, I was part of this? I know I have, because when I bring people to the 9/11 Memorial, I am so proud that I'm part of it. I'm proud of this, that we're part of it. All it takes is a little imagination and some dreaming. And that's what it takes. Thank you so much for the work you're doing, for the commitment to the city. I've been on the planning board. I know what that can be. And thank you so much, and just let's hope that this is going to be the joining together of this community that we're also proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else?
To check on the button, does it say on and then? It'll come on.
Bill Gay? Okay. 423 150th Avenue. I guess I'm going to be the naysayer on this whole thing. I spent a considerable amount of time going through the amendments for 2014. I find them very confusing, very conflicting, very difficult to understand. I guess one of my biggest concerns about it is the fact that if you go back to the SAP from 2009, that has a very strong portion in it where it talks about the height of buildings, and basically that standard near is 3 floors over base flood elevation. And what I find about the developments that have been proposed here, it looks like the height requirements have been thrown out completely, but I don't see that they're abrogated any place in the 2014 amendments. The 2014 amendments barely talk about height, and it's in a conflicting kind of way. So when we had the hearings in here for the quasi-judicial hearings, the first set of proposals came in at 10, 11 stories, sometimes a little bit less than that. And when that was questioned during those hearings, the developers came back and said, well, we're only building to 40% of what we could build here, which said to me that you could be building 25-story buildings here, perhaps 27-story buildings here. One of the things that's missing from these ordinances from 2014 is any performance data as to what could be expected. You can't tell from these ordinances whether you could build 25-story buildings or 50-story buildings or 30-story buildings, that it's completely out of control. That I think there was a substantial amount of time spent with the 2009 SAP where there's a lot of community input, whereas none of that happened with the 2014 plans that were put in place, the amendments that were made. These were done pretty much behind closed doors. They were done by consultants and came before the planning board, and they were pretty much passed without much discussion by the community. And that's how we wind up with what I would call these very large buildings here on 150th Avenue. I would like to see us go back to something that's closer to the 2009 SAP, and I'm wondering, you know, what happened to those requirements from 2009? There's another requirement in here, and it's mentioned in the 2014 amendments, that if you're going to go above the height requirements from the 2009 SAP, then the developers would have to make some kind of contributions to the community. In these development packages that have been approved by the Planning Board and also by the BOC, I don't see anything that addresses that whatsoever. Supposedly, the most recent plans submitted by the two developers are to adhere to the 2009 SAP, and I don't see any contributions in there to the general welfare of the community that's specified in the 2014 agreements. I don't know what they are, what those contributions are. A second concern I have about is about the changes from Madeira Way. I don't know if you folks spend much time on 150th Avenue or not, but traffic out here has been pretty horrendous, and it backs up quite a bit going across the bridge, and you know, can be backed up for a substantial period of time. The current proposal is to reduce the number of lanes on Madeira Way from 4 lanes to 2 lanes. And to me, Madeira Way is a fairly significant traffic access to the community. There are people from north of us that use Madeira Way to get out of here in the morning, come back at night. Cutting down the number of lanes on Madeira Way doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It doesn't make any sense further because we're going to dump a lot of traffic onto Madeira Way. We're going to have 2 hotels that are pushing traffic in and out of those locations on a daily basis, so that even in the best of circumstances, Madeira Way is going to be become a traffic jam up here, much more than what we have right now. I think that's a bad decision to reduce Madeira Way from 4 lanes to 2 and to take out the traffic light.
All right, thank you, sir. We have to keep it to 3. I think we went a little bit over that.
Okay, I probably did, but you know, I think you might be giving me some consideration because we've had you know, over an hour of presentations, you know, on one side and nothing from the other side.
We just have to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to speak. So thank you. We heard you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Just like make one more comment. The traffic studies that were done here were never vetted by the city, and they're totally inadequate. For example,
Sir,
in the
thank
last
you.
traffic study that was done by the Carnes development, they failed to take into consideration about 40,000 square feet of retail space. Traffic is a big issue
Thank you,
here.
sir.
It's going to get worse. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak? All right, well, I'd like to thank Linda for a great presentation that was very informative. I think we all learned a lot, and if there's nothing else to add, I guess this meeting or this workshop is adjourned.